Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Short and to the Point on the Comeback and Awful Announcing. Jess Kleinschmidt here with another episode, an exciting one. I've been looking up to Chris Rose for years and years and years. I grew up watching him, of course, on MLB Network's Intentional Talk. He's since then left the network, and now he's with Jomboy hosting a multitude of shows and being that guy. Still with NFL Network doing some stuff there, and of course, BattleBots, which was my big guilty pleasure growing up. I remember watching with my father and my little brother, making fun of them for watching the show. And the next thing you know, you're hoping another episode comes up. So we discussed that with him and more. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm excited about this episode, and here's our conversation. All right, Chris, the one thing that stood out to me about you was just how authentic you are. And that's something that I preach. And you were talking a lot about it recently and how you want to be personable. So why is authenticity important to you in your craft?
Well, I think people can see through you pretty quickly. Like, I learned pretty early on in this business. One of my mentors is Kevin Frazier, host of Entertainment Tonight. I was his producer back in Cincinnati when we were both kind of starting out. It was his first full-time on-air job, and it was my first full-time job, period. And this is in the early 90s. And so Kevin's a dear friend, and I always saw the way he went about his business. I was like, man, you're the same guy on TV that you are off of it. And he's like, yeah, that's what you want to be. It's pretty simple. Like, people will see through you. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. I think there are some people who have fooled us for quite a long time. And people always say, God, that person seems like the nicest person. Or they'll say, God, that person seems like such a jerk. And it's actually the opposite.
Right.
And so I think the key is just being true to who you are. People aren't always going to love you. I mean, I wish that was universal. There are a handful of people in our business who I think are close to universally loved, but very few reach that. And so you just have to be comfortable with the opinions you're going to share and kind of go from there. I think that's the most important thing.
And it sounds so simple, you just have to be comfortable in who you are, which is almost impossible just in everyday life because, social media makes us want to be somebody else, what have you. But especially in this industry, there are times where I'll go on and I try to be somebody else that I'm not. But so how do you tap into just being comfortable with who you are?
I don't know any other way. I got to be honest with you. I've always been an opinionated person. My family can tell you that. And it's not that I like to be right, but I like to at least have my opinion heard with things. It's really important also listen. And I do that. I feel like I do that pretty well as well. But like I said, I just don't know any other way, and I think that people will gravitate toward that because even if they don't agree with you, hopefully they respect the way you're saying something. And I make mistakes every day still on, when you're doing a daily podcast like Trevor Plouffe and I do with Baseball Today, or a weekly interview show like the Rose Rotation or anything else that I might be doing, I'm going to make mistakes. Everybody does. And that's okay. It's owning up to them when you make them, apologizing when necessary. Hopefully that doesn't happen because that means it's a major mistake in my opinion. But I think it's okay to have differing opinions for whatever reason. I think we've gotten off track, particularly in this country, the last 4 or 5 years with not sharing the same opinions. Like, it's okay. It's okay if we don't see things the same way, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else,
right,
in my opinion.
And how do you find the balance though? Because you still have to inform people. You still have to tell them certain things about what's going on. How do you find the balance of being informative, but also entertaining and personable? Because I feel like that can be difficult to do sometimes.
It can be. I've had the good fortune of having a lot of practice on a lot of startup shows. Best Damn Sports Show, period, Intentional Talk. Those are shows that didn't have a blueprint when they started. And I think the only way we thought that we could ever make it was to entertain and inform. Some shows, some of the morning shows have kind of taken that to the nth degree. I don't know how much of it has to do with being factually accurate. At the end of the day, like, you can choose to not support your opinion with fact and just create this persona that people want to be entertained by for a couple hours every day. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, it is entertainment at the end of the day. Like, you are fighting for eyeballs, no matter where you live, whether you live in the linear space, on radio, you're streaming, you're doing podcasts. It doesn't matter. There's only so many hours in a day that your followers or potential listeners have. So if you're super entertaining and yelling at the top of your lungs or taking shots at people, and that's what brings people in, go for it. It's just not the way I like to do business. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It's made people very successful, famous, and rich. And it will continue to, I imagine, for quite some time. At the end of the day, I just explained to people that you have to be able to put your head on the pillow and be comfortable with what you're doing, who you are, how entertaining you are, at what expense you're doing it. And if you don't have a problem with it, go for it.
I love that. And you mentioned these startup shows, and like, that's kind of what you're doing now with Jomboy. It's like blank canvases, and you love the challenge of you can start from scratch. And how is that beneficial to you? Because I feel like a lot of people would prefer structure, and that can help certain aspects to their approach. But for you, you kind of get to be creative and get that challenge. So how does that help you?
It is a tremendous challenge when there's nobody who says, hey, this is the way it's been done. Like, that's pretty freeing as I don't know if you call yourself a sports artist, if you will, but I mean, that's what you want. I remember, our boss, George Greenberg, back at the Best Damn Sports Show period, he said, I want you to push the limits of this show. If you screw up, we'll tell you afterward, and maybe we'll tell you not to do it again, but we're not going to put any restrictor plates on what you do. And sometimes it did get us in trouble. Sometimes we pushed the envelope too far. And at times you look back and you're like, what the hell were we thinking? Like, why would we have ever done that segment? But for the most part, it's pretty awesome when you have bosses that are just like, go do it. Go have fun. Go be creative. Because in so many worlds, you have to live in a tiny box and, you can't say that. You can't do this. I mean, listen, I've worked for 2 league-owned networks. I work for one right now. And you do have to be a little more careful how you say things or what you say. I get that. But having the ability to have a lot of latitude is pretty awesome.
You said it was freeing, but it kind of reminds me of the scenario when, like, you were a kid in school and you were told not to talk, and that's when you wanted to talk. But then when the teacher said you could talk, you didn't talk. Was that a scenario where you were told to push the limits? Did you still hold back a little bit? Because that wasn't being done during the Best Damn Sports Show period era.
Yeah, well, I mean, we were kind of the first of its kind. I mean, I suppose we kind of blazed the trail for what's out there today, meaning I remember people being critical of us, saying, why in the world should John Kruk have an opinion about football? Or why should Michael Irvin be saying anything about the NBA, or John Sallet? Like, we let them talk about other sports because they were just fans too. And they would sometimes Sally would ask the most ridiculous questions about baseball. I'd be like, Sal, what are you saying? Like, what? Like, that's not the way it is. But you have to remember that not everybody was an expert on every sport. And I thought that that's kind of why a show like that resonated with people, was that we put people in totally different positions. And now everybody is talking about every sport. So either you're welcome or I apologize. I don't know which one it is I should be saying, but yeah, I think we were kind of the first of its kind.
When did you realize you were the first of its kind? Because, or maybe not that necessarily, because you kind of knew that, but when that really started to pick up and people resonated with it, because it was an experimentation at the beginning, what was the feedback like when you thought, hey, we have something here?
Well, I remember that in the beginning, we would have a very difficult time getting guests, right? We were like, we want you to come on the Best Damn Sports Show, period. And they were like, help me out. Don't know what it
Right.
is. And then when people started asking to come on the Best Damn Sports Show, period, pretty
Wow.
quickly, I knew we were on to something. And I didn't know how long it was going to last. Like I had been working at Fox for probably a year, almost a year and a half, when we had heard rumblings of this new show coming along. And we were like, Tom Arnold's going to be a part of it. I was like, Tom Arnold? You mean like Roseanne's ex-husband, Tom Arnold? Like, yeah. I was like,
Yeah,
well,
that one.
this could be. Yeah. And oddly enough, Jess, I wasn't even supposed to be the host of the show. I got hired the day before the show launched in July of 2001.
Wow.
And it changed my life. Like, I am so thankful that happened and appreciative. And it was pretty amazing. It was an amazing 8 years. It was great for 6.5. The last year and a half, we kind of knew that they were just kind of running out the string and cutting budget, and all that was very difficult to handle, because we had built something that, in my opinion, could have gone on through today. I mean, we could have been Fox's version of PTI, where the show just could have kept going and going and going. And I think maybe not, obviously not with the same cast, probably, but the idea could have been there. And I think if it had been launched in 2014 instead of 2001, I think it would have been the hit show around.
And that's kind of cool to think about, that could have stayed with today's era of coverage too. And when you think about that, that's got to be kind of cool, because baseball specifically is always transitioning, but so is the way that we cover and consume sports. So knowing that could be on a streaming service and we could still be consuming it as we're walking around looking at our phones, that's got to be kind of cool to know that you're a part of something like that. Yeah.
I mean, it could have been, I think about it a lot, what the show would look like in today's day and age, 15 years ago, with social media exploding the way that it did, how much it could have helped our programming, given us ample opportunity to even make the show bigger and bigger and bigger. And, I think there's a lot of podcasts that probably took notes on what we were doing, and not exactly follow the pattern, but certainly portions of it. And I'm proud of that. I don't look at those shows and I'm not jealous and like, God, I wish that had been us. Like I say, hey, I really feel like there are traits of Best Damn in there. With baseball, there are certainly traits of intentional talk on other shows that have popped up around. And I'm proud of all that stuff.
And you said you found out the day before you were going to be hosting. Walk me through that.
Yeah. Well, the week before, there were two guys who were going to be splitting the hosting duties because of their commitments at Fox already. And the week leading up to it, it was like the final dress rehearsals for the entire staff. They wanted the on-air people to start building more and more chemistry. They wanted the people behind the scenes to start getting into a daily routine on, what the timeline was going to be like every day to put out a show that, an organization like this had never put together. It wasn't just a highlight show. It was something totally different. And neither of the guys who were expected to host could host. They had other commitments. And so I remember it was my wife's birthday, and we were out to a movie. It was like a Monday or a Tuesday. And this is back in the day of pagers, everybody. And a pager is a little thing that you wear on your belt, so that if your work needed to get a hold of you, they would page you, and then you would call. Right.
I've heard of those. Yes. Yeah.
I got paged, and they said, hey, listen, we need you to help us out this week. We need you to kind of fill in on Thursday and Friday during Best Damn rehearsal week. All right. And we think you could be like a good vacation fill in when neither of those two guys are available. I said, okay. I didn't know anything about it. So I go in on Tuesday, I sit around. Wednesday, I kind of watch what's going on. And Thursday, it's my day to rehearse with the crew. And I did it. And I did it Friday. And my boss, Scott Ackerson, came up to me and he was like, we might be calling you over the weekend. I was like, okay, great. You want to call me for the weekend? Call me over the weekend. You know how to reach me. And they called me on Sunday and they said, we want you to be the host of this new show. I said, oh, okay. I really didn't think anything of it. I was like, fine, great, I'll do it. Whatever you want, I'm here. And I started, and as I said, it changed my career. And I remember telling my wife, I was like, hey, I'm going to be pulling double duty here for a little while because I had to do Best Damn during the day when we would tape it in the middle to late afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And then at night, I would do the National Sports Report, which was Fox Sports Net's equivalent of Sports Center back in the day. We were just short bodies. And they said, you're going to be pulling double dipping and all that sort of stuff for a while. I had to cancel a couple of vacations. And she's like, they're always screwing you. And I was like, hey, it could end up being good. And it ended up being great.
Yeah.
And as I said, it changed my career path. I got to do things at Fox Sports and eventually got more visibility to get other jobs at MLB Network and eventually NFL Network and eventually BattleBots. And it's been an amazing, amazing ride. And now with Jomboy Media, it just continues with a different generation of people who hadn't been introduced to what I did for 25 plus years.
Yeah. And it's been cool to see them embrace you too. And we'll talk about Jomboy a little bit later, but you talked recently about in an interview about leaving MLB Network. There was a freeing feeling of it. You get to be more yourself because you had to go into your boss's office. It was like a principal's office type of deal. And they would say, you can't say these things despite how you felt. They said, you still can't say these things. And of course it was team owned and league owned. And then that was a part of all the teams and stuff. So how has it been nice to know that like, it's more free now that you're no longer with MLB Network? No ill will toward them, because I know they're still members of your family, but what's that been like?
Yeah, I mean, it is different. I loved my decade there. It was, I still consider some of those people some of my best friends in the biz. Like they are people I went to battle with every day, and awesome place. But yes, you're restricted in. I mean, you have to call it what it is, and that's state-run TV. It is like at the end of the day, you have the bosses who are watching, so they're not going to cover things the way that everybody else does. So that's you have to understand as a viewer that there's still plenty of stuff that you can get from MLB Network, where they do a great job in covering it. Like they break down the sport exceptionally well. Some of their analysts are outstanding, but at the end of the day, that's what it is. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't obviously shows that still can't provide great opportunity to deliver things to viewers. At Intentional Talk, where there weren't many times, we were kind of a silly show, right? It's taken on kind of a different tack since I've left, and that's okay. But we were a show where when we had to be serious, we would discuss serious things. But you could go around and find, people enjoyed the 5 to 6 hour because it was fun, it was relaxing, and all that sort of stuff. And now with Jomboy Media, we're not going to get a call from an owner saying, why are you, taking shots at our team? We just don't get it. We're opinionated. We still have a ton of fun. We try and make the sport more and more enjoyable for people. And I think that's really, really important, because I think baseball needs it. And I think baseball needs us.
I completely agree. Was that an easy transition, or were you still kind of hesitant knowing that you're used to having to be held back, but now you get to be more open? Was there any sort of hesitation, or were you able to just go full throttle?
No, I think probably if I look back on it, I probably went too far the other direction. Like I was like, oh, well, now I'm totally, the chains are off. I can say whatever I want. You don't have to force that. So, retrospectively, if I go back and look at some of the first shows we put out, I probably was a little too tough on the sport and the decision makers and things of that nature. Now, when I feel like they're not doing the right thing, I will say something. I'll definitely say something. And I think it's my job and it's my right as a baseball fan to say what I feel like I need to say. I'm not going to go out searching for it. But if there are big topics that I feel like people need to hear something about, I'm not going to shy away from it. And once again, those are the sort of things that you can't cover at a league-owned network properly, in my opinion.
Yeah. And one thing that you said recently about like the space of baseball media, you said there's room for everyone. And just hearing you talk about the coverage has been really cool because you're very open about it. And you're even saying IT isn't what it used to be, and that's okay. And, there's Jomboy and the MLB Network, and obviously the different RSNs who cover it, that's a certain way as well. When you say there's room for everyone, and there's obviously a genuine tone to that, do you think that people consuming baseball media are aware of that? Because I feel like they're not.
Well, I think that, you're going to find it wherever it is, on your TikTok, on your Instagram, on X. I mean, you're going to find stuff, and then eventually you're going to hopefully fall in love with something. That I remember doing an event for Easton several years ago, and they brought in a bunch of content creators, and it was, I got to meet some really interesting people that I'm still close with today. And I remember, I was still working for Intentional Talk at the time in the network. And I remember the first thing I said to them was, I'm not one of those people that works in linear TV and doesn't get who you are. Like, you have to understand, I know who you are. Believe me. And I know that some people, whether it's in the offices that I work in or in the league offices, that don't get you. I said, you guys are the ones who are going to help the sport grow. Like, it's not going to be the people who are watching MLB Network right now. We've got those people. It's the people who are going to make the sport really fun and bring a different tact to how we're covering it, to get to share different opinions and different philosophies, and bring them different stories that we don't do in the linear world. I remember having this discussion with them, and I think they were kind of relieved, because I think they were probably expecting me to be like, well, that's not the way it's done at MLB Network. And it wasn't that way. I've always, and then lo and behold, who would know that a short time later, I would be part of their group.
Yeah.
And I do love that aspect of it. I think that there's amazing content creators. I always, hop on YouTube to see what other people are doing, not just us. And I think that's how, the game will remain healthy and continue to grow, because we need as many people talking about the sport as possible.
I love that. And I've noticed, over the years, I feel like baseball players have been more outspoken compared to how they were when I first got here. And I feel like you have the personality to bring that out in a lot of them. And I feel like it's also has a lot to do with just, I guess, the area or the way that you're approaching it. Because it could be more laid back. And I feel like guys feel more comfortable opening up in those aspects. But have you noticed that over the years? I feel we're seeing a different side of baseball players. I feel like other sports, we've seen that side. But baseball, I think it's more new, where the guys are becoming more approachable and outspoken.
So there's a few things you have to keep in mind. Like, baseball players, that scene in Bull Durham where Crash Davis is teaching Nuke LaLoosh, like the phrases he's going to have to use in interviews in the big leagues. Like, write these down, because they're as boring and as generic as possible. And that, Bull Durham is a movie that's 35 years old, but it's that sort of stuff still plays. Like, it feels like some guys were taught, make sure you don't say anything stupid outside of the little box. When you get up to the big leagues and they shove a mic and a camera in your face, don't do it. Well, now you can have an opinion right here. This is how you share your opinion if you want to. You don't need us. But I do feel like, like a show like the Chris Rose Rotation, where I get to interview people, is really important for baseball fans from the standpoint of, you get to sit down for more than a 1 minute clip.
Yeah.
I don't think clips is how we get to know people. We might get to know your personality that way, but we really, we want to know the people we're cheering for at the end of the day. And I think that that's the biggest difference between Intentional Talk, where obviously the interviews are the things that really stuck with people. But those were 8 minutes. They were a great 8 minutes. They were a fun-filled 8 minutes. They were a totally different 8 minutes than we were used to seeing, certainly in a national scope. But it was still 8 minutes. So if I give you 40 and we get to find out all about people, then that's the win. Like with the rotation, we have a half dozen guys who are rotating co-hosts. And so we check in with them every 5 or 6 weeks to see how their season's going. And the thing I love reading most in the comments section on our YouTube channel is, God, I'm a Giants fan, but I love listening to Tyler Glasnow and his perspective on things. Like, I can't stand the Dodgers, but man, that guy seems awesome. Like, I'd love to have a beer with him. Or, Austin Hedges, whatever. I don't care that the guy's hitting 150 because he freaking seems like an awesome teammate, which he is. Like, that sort of stuff is great. And to me, that's the win in the sport. And obviously what we're trying to do at Jomboy is let people know who you're cheering for.
And you also bring a balance of fandom into that as well. And I feel like people get weirded out when it's like a hardo fan covering a game or hosting a podcast, but you guys don't escape the fact that you love the game or you love this player. And that's kind of cool to see as well, because you're an extension of the fan as well. And that needs some love as well.
Totally. I mean, I got into this because I was a fan, and I never understood people in this business, whether they're a beat reporter with a team or an announcer or whatever. I don't understand how you lose your fandom. I do not get it. I am as big a Guardians, Browns, and Cavs fan as when I was 11 or 8 or 6. It has not changed. It hasn't changed at all for me. And for people who are like, I root for guys who I've gotten to know over the years. That part I get. Like, you become a little closer to some people in the business. One of my really good friends in baseball is Stephen Vogt. So the fact that he's now managing my team, I texted him. I was like, hey, listen, man, here's the deal. If you make a shitty pitching move, I'm coming after you. He's like, I can't wait for it, Rosie. I can't wait. So I love that aspect of it. And it doesn't mean that you can't be like, it's so funny on baseball today. Everybody's like, God, I can't believe that Rose hates the Brewers, or he's such a Yankee hater. He hates the Dodgers. And then other people write, why does that guy love the Dodgers so much? Man, he can't stop talking about the Brewers. I'm like, folks, you know who I am. Like, look, it says it right here on my hat. I'm a Cleveland Guardians fan. I might like watching certain players play or watching other teams play. Like, it's fun. I'm not rooting for them. Do I root for some people in the league? Yes, I do. I will be the first one to tell you that I'm rooting for certain people. But I don't hate your team. I do not hate your team. I just don't.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And that's okay. And I think people want you to hate their team, though. You talked about the last 4 or 5 years. People want you to hate something, and they get mad if you don't hate something. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, now, when we get to the playoffs, if the Guardians aren't in it, are there certain teams that I might want to see win more than others? Sure. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's okay. If you don't like the Guardians, you want to root against them, go for it. I'm not going to be mad. And I'm not going to be like, we do this too. In Cleveland, we have a small market syndrome. Like, we all think that everybody hates us, that they don't want to put us on TV, that they don't want to talk about us. That when we play the Yankees, they don't even mention that we're playing. All they do is talk about the Yankees. I was like, look, at the end of the day, if we win the World Series, they're going to talk about us. They're going to talk about us. So let's go win a World Series. We've been close a couple times, really close in 2016. But if you really want people to talk about you, win it. Go win it.
Just go win the World Series and we'll talk about you. That's beautiful. And first of all, if you spend 30 seconds with Stephen Vogt, you will fall in love with him. And I'm glad you brought him up. Yeah. I covered him for years. And I was going to pick your brain about him just because I can't think of a person who exudes, maybe the baseball reference numbers aren't necessarily there, but he's a guy who will have a job forever. Where were you when you found out he was going to be a manager? And were you shocked that he got there as quickly as he did?
So I had heard that, I'd either read or heard that he had a first interview. And I didn't really want to bother him because I was like, well, you know what? If it happens, great. Then and then I got a hold of him when I had heard there was a second interview. Somebody told me And I called him and I was like, what's going on here? He's like, I can't tell you. He goes, but I think it's close. And I was like, really? I was like, my buddy's going to be the manager of my team? Really? And this is not easy. Like, he has taken over for a guy who's going to have a plaque in Cooperstown in 3 years. Not easy for your first job, for anybody to take that over. But for a first job, for a guy who 18 months ago was hitting a home run and dancing around the bases in Oakland while his kids
Top 5 moments of me that I covered.
Ever.
Top 5 moments. Yeah, it was awesome.
Easily. So, but I told anybody that would listen in Cleveland, Ohio, I was like, guys, gals, there's going to be some learning experiences for him. Like, he's going to screw up, but I don't think you could handpick a better person to replace Terry Francona in this city than Stephen Vogt. I said, he's already got the media thing down pat. And that is a big thing for some people, because they got to talk before the game and then after. I was like, he's got that down. And I said, he's going to walk in the clubhouse and he's hit against Shane Bieber and Tristan McKenzie and all of our bullpen. And he's devised game plans against Jose Ramirez and Andres Jimenez. Like, he's done this. And he knows what you're going through, whether you've made the all-star team or you're trying to make the roster. Like, you can't sneak anything past this guy because he knows how to identify with whatever role you're going to have on this team. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome because he has seen it all. He has struggled when he's come up to the big leagues. He's been in all-star games. He's been in postseasons. He's been DFA'd. There ain't anything that guy hasn't seen as a player. And so that is only going to help him identify. And the fact that he's 39 years old doesn't hurt either. So it's just, I'm really proud of him. And I hope that this run continues all season long. I think we're a little thin in the starting pitching department, but I trust that organization and I certainly trust him.
I will say, despite Bieber being out, we're still feeling that opening day performance that he put on the A's. We still feel that. It was electric. And you talk about your Cleveland sports fandom. How do you define a Cleveland sports fan? I'm talking about a diehard who's been there through the thick of it to now. How would you define this fan?
I describe us as 90% scar tissue. That's what we are. We have been through an awful lot. Like, how many cities have, these indelible moments that unfortunately have gone against your city? We call it and then something else. It could be the drive, the fumble, the shot. I was in 2 of those 3, and the only reason I wasn't at the other one is because I was in high school and it was in Denver, Colorado, and I couldn't go to the game. So that's how those moments are, right? If you're a Cleveland sports fan, you're not trying to catch the next bus. You're waiting for the next bus to hit you. Like, that's inevitably what happened.
Okay.
And it took the Guardians, then Indians, did not finish higher than 3rd the first 24 years of my life. They didn't finish higher than 3rd in their division. Like, just think about that for a second. That's almost a quarter century where they weren't even close to competitive. And finally, all this great stuff happens in the mid-90s with the birth of a beautiful new ballpark and an exciting young team that could mash as well as any lineup I've ever seen. The Browns were great when I was growing up. 5 times in the 80s, we made the playoffs, and 3 times we were on the Super Bowl's doorstep. And then in the early 90s, Jordan prevented the Cavs from getting to a finals. And then one of the happiest days of my life was winning the frickin' lottery in 2003 to know we were getting LeBron. And then I had never had the best player in a sport. I had a chance to root for him, right? I mean, I'm too young to have seen Jim Brown. We didn't have the best player in any sport, but we finally had it. Then he left. He left. And then he came back. I couldn't believe when he came back. And then, we finally win a championship in 2016. And I remember looking at our youngest son, who was 10 at the time. And I looked at him and I grabbed him by the face and I said, you have no idea how lucky you are that this happened before you're even a teenager. I was 45 years old, and that's
Mm.
how long I had to wait. And sports has been all our family's done. That's it. Like, this is all we have. And for it to have happened was incredible.
When you said you were 45 and you had to wait, was it worth the wait?
Yeah, it was not. I mean, like, it's weird, but I remember the losses more than I remember that championship. And I know
Yeah.
it's probably a loser mentality, but I remember exactly, like, when the Browns were almost going to make the Super Bowl on January 11th, 1987. I'm sitting in section 37, row 2, seat 1, and Brian Brennan catches a touchdown with 5 and change to go in the fourth quarter. And I remember saying it in my head, like, we're going to the freaking Super Bowl. I remember saying it. And then Elway drives 98 yards and they win it in overtime. And I remember we take a thing called the rapid transit. Think of it as like an above ground subway in Cleveland. And I grew up right across the street from my stop, and we didn't have cell phones in 1987. So my dad didn't know what time we were coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me afterward that he waited for every rapid that stopped because he wanted to be there to greet us.
Oh.
And I got off the rapid, and he's just standing outside, and he gives me this huge hug. It's freezing. It's Cleveland, Ohio in the middle of January. And he's like, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Because he knew how much it meant to us. It's still, I mean, like, that. I think that's the crushing part. You know, unfortunately, both my parents are gone. My mom died 17 years ago and was an enormous sports fan. My dad died 12 years ago. And I never got to experience that with them. Like, and I think that's probably why I remember the losses more, because I got to at least share those experiences with them. But the fact that I got to do that with my 2 boys and my wife, and celebrate at least one championship together is pretty awesome.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up your family, because I wanted to ask you about that. And I read this article about like the day in the life of you, and this was when you were at MLB Network, and you immediately start your day off, you know, taking your kids to school, and then you have a weekly date night with Michelle, and it was just one of those things that was very apparent that family is important to you. How do you find the balance of a career that's not your typical 9 to 5 schedule? It's a lot of time. You even said so when it came to the Best Damn Sports Show. Michelle had some qualms about it as well, but how do you find the balance of it all, but you still remain like a family man?
Well, it's what, first of all, I don't do much outside of my work, and that's been a real problem for me. Like, I wish I had, like, Kevin Millar is exactly who he is, and it's
Mhm.
one of the reasons I love him is that he finds time to do things for himself. You know, now most of it's golf, which he
Yeah.
loves and he's passionate about, but he does, and he takes his kids out on the boat in the water, and like, he does all that stuff. He's able to escape from this nuttiness, and I've had a hard time with that. So I'll be the first one to admit that I it's not too late, but it's getting late. So I've got to maybe that'll change when our youngest goes to college next year, and we're calling around the house and we're like, hello, nobody's
Mhm.
there, and there's not a baseball game to go to or anything else. So maybe that'll change a little bit coming up. But as far as the family goes, like, I know how much my parents meant to me, and I know how much they regretted when they weren't at certain things that they couldn't be at, and it really bothered them. And so I've always tried to be there, because I get so much enjoyment out of watching our older son when he was playing basketball, or he was a guitarist. So if there was a music event that he was in, I love doing that. For Brady, it's been a lot of baseball since he was
Mhm.
6. Wanting to be there as much as possible. Like, that is a big, big deal. And I've turned down some jobs and some opportunities because I needed to be here more than anywhere else.
Mhm.
And it probably cost me maybe some long-term really good opportunities. And although that might hurt a little bit, I don't regret it because my family needed me. You know, we needed to be together at that point. And maybe not every family would have made that decision. That's okay. I'm not asking for a pat on the back like, hey, Chris, boy, you're father of the year. I'm only the father of the Rose family, this little group of 4. And for our family, that's the decision I needed to make at the time. And I don't regret it. And I'm thrilled I made it. And I've always looked at it that way. Like, I'd rather be around these 3 other people than anybody else in my life.
So you're still trying to figure out the balance then, because I mean,
Oh yeah.
I'm single and I don't have kids or a husband. And I'm still trying to find the balance of like taking time for myself, which is, it's difficult, you know, and I am, I mean, I'm figuring it out, but I think it's the same thing. I'm nervous that it could go away at any second.
Totally.
And so it's figuring it out's difficult, I feel.
It is. It's not easy. It sounds easy. It is not. It is not, because we're paranoid people in this business, and we feel like if we don't hop on every opportunity, then they're going to forget who you are. And that is tough. I mean, I've wrestled with that too. It's not fun. And it's why I feel like basically 3:30 in the afternoon Pacific time is when the baseball games start on a given weekday. And I feel like if I'm not in front of that TV from 3:30 till basically 10 at night, that I'm not doing my job to the best of its ability. And I'm cheating somebody, whether that's a coworker, a viewer, one of our ardent followers at Jomboy. Like, I'm not doing the best I can for those people. And I have to be able to step away. I have to be able to decompress. Like, we had Brady's senior day yesterday for baseball. And I was able to put everything else on hold and enjoy that, because you know what? He deserved it first and foremost, but I deserved it too. Like, it's okay to say, this one is, this is for all those practices you drove to. Like, these are for all these freaking tournaments that we played out in Moore Park and Camarillo and got up at 6 a.m. to go do it. Like, it's now coming to an end. You should be able to enjoy it. Like, the Diamondbacks and Giants are going to play 12 other times this year. So if you don't,
and they're going to play with or without you watching. They're going to play with or without you watching. Yeah.
Like, it's going to be okay. So if you don't immediately get home and turn on the TV, it's all right, Chris. It's going to be okay. And so I'm still learning that at an advanced age.
And how did it feel to kind of shut that off and be there for Brady?
Great.
Yeah.
I'm always there for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
They know that.
Yeah.
And they also know that, I do work hard and a lot, but whenever I feel like I'm always there.
I love that. That's amazing. Last couple before I let you go. When it comes to baseball media, you've seen, and we're going to I guess we can make this more sports media, because you cover football and all these other things as well. Where do you see the future of sports media going as far as you're in the driver's seat?
Boy, well, I mean, I think it's a little bit all over the place, which I think can be good. I do think there's still a time and a place for long form. I understand why people don't want to sit down for 40 minutes and listen to an interview, but hopefully if you see that there's a specific chapter in the show that you want to listen to, that you can just hit a link and that'll take you there, and you listen for 12 minutes and you get something out of it. And then there's times where you just want to be entertained for 40 seconds and see some kids interviewing major league players on a field. Like, I think that's all fun too. I do think that the sport has to get their streaming service figured out. I hate reading about people that are blacked out. They can't watch teams, in Vegas because they're too close to LA and Phoenix and San Francisco and San Diego, so they can't watch any baseball. Like, they have to figure all of that out. And I do think that baseball has to continue to wrap its arms around these content creators. Like, that's how you're going to grow your audience. You have to be willing to. And it's not always about controlling the message. It's sometimes you have to be willing to take a hit too from people who are critical, but they're talking about your sport.
Yeah.
Tom Arnold taught me a long time ago. I remember asking him, I said, Tom, at that point, people hadn't really mentioned my name with anything. And when I started doing Best Damn, I got a couple of one-off shows for Fox called Celebrity Boxing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't seen it, go find it on YouTube. It was horrible. Like, we were taking people and putting them in. They were celebrities who went out and boxed one another, and it was ridiculous. And I remember that somebody wrote something critical. Chris Rose, who wants to be considered a legitimate journalist, hosts Celebrity Boxing, but then again, that's kind of the direction his career is going since he hosts the Best Damn Sports Show, period. And I remember saying, hey, Tom, like, it kind of hurt me. I was probably 30 or 31 years old, and a national publication was taking a shot at me. I was like, Tom, what? He goes, listen, dude, as long as they're spelling your name right, there's no bad publicity.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, okay. So I think that Major League Baseball could take a little, advice from Tom Arnold, of all people, and say, hey, as long as they're talking about your sport mostly in good light, I'm talking about anything where it's not super serious, but even if you don't agree with the thought process, let people talk about it. It's okay.
I love that. I used to hate the mini mic situation, and now I've totally embraced the mini mic interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the mini mic's great. It's great. It's fun. It
is fun. A big memory that I had growing up was sitting on the couch with my dad watching BattleBots. And it's funny because it was one of those things where I made fun of my brother and dad for watching it. The next thing you know, I'm begging for there to be another episode on. Were you surprised with this cult following that this show kind of brought on and brought into us?
Yes. Shocked. I didn't know a thing about it. And so it's the spring of 2015. And my agent called and she's like, what do you know about the show BattleBots? I'm like, Battle what? Battle what? I had no idea what it was. And she said, I'm going to put you up for the play-by-play role. I think you'd be great for it. I said, okay, whatever. So I remember dropping a resume reel. I walked into their offices in Burbank. I introduced myself. I said, here's a resume reel. Have at it. I'm available upon request. But I went back and I remember looking the show up back in its Comedy Central days and on YouTube. And I'm sitting there, and our oldest son at the time, I want to say he was probably wrapping up 9th grade, something like that. And he comes down. He's like, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to be auditioning for this show called BattleBots. I said, why don't you take a look at it? And he looks at it, and 90 seconds in, he goes, Dad, you are not doing that show. I said, well, what do you mean I'm not doing that show? He goes, Dad, I'm going to get laughed out of school if you end up doing that. I said, dude, it looks kind of fun. Like, it's, give it a shot. And oh, by the way, I don't even have the job. So, you might not even have to worry about it. Well, long story short, I get the job. It airs as a summer replacement on ABC that year. Not only does he love it, but all of his boys love it too. And I remember walking into his room in the fall and going, hey, you're welcome. You're finally not a loser. There you go. Congratulations. He's like, oh, screw you, Dad. But I think he might have apologized for saying that thing about BattleBots, but it was fun. And I love it. I'll tell you this. I miss it terribly. I hope it comes back. The writer's strike kind of got us a little bit here. And I do hope that it comes back because for me, we shoot it over a 2-week period. And it is like summer camp because you have people from all over the world coming together. And it is an amazing, amazing community of people. It's hard work because the hours are extremely long. We're there 13 hours a day. Yeah. Shooting a lot of shows in a short time. But it's an amazing, amazing group of people led by Whale Rock Productions. I hope we get another crack at it.
I do too. Like I said, I went from being like, this is weird to I hope there's another episode on it. Like injected into my veins. It was so good. Because my dad was nerdy. He was a nerdy guy and like he loved sports. So you combine both worlds, chef's kiss.
It's a great it's one of the few shows just that everybody in the family can watch. Like you could watch it if you're 7 or 70.
Yes.
And get something out of it. Most shows, they're either too adult for little kids or too boring if you're older.
Yeah.
So I agree with you 100%. So I hope that there's some executives out there listening. Wise up. Let's go.
Yeah. I remember even my mom kind of having the same thing. She's like, that's so silly. But then you'd see her like leaning on the couch, like watching it a little bit. Like, it's like, just embrace it. It's okay. It's okay. Before I let you go, can I get a Bruce Bochy impression?
You can. So now that he's, with the Rangers doing his thing, I haven't heard him a ton. Obviously, when he was with the Giants and you're getting a lot more West Coast games, you'd always hear him. But, he'd always love talking about, Pablo, he's one of my favorites. He's a good kid. He's a little, there's sometimes he'll chase out a strike zone, but he's a good kid overall. We got a really good team here in Texas. It's been fun to be the champs. There you go.
Beautifully done. I felt like I was back in a Boch scrum. It felt like I was right back there. It's so good.
I just have to inflate my head to a different size and paint my eyelid blonde.
Yes, a little bit. Yeah, it's a specific look that he brings, and you really embraced it. Chris, this was absolutely amazing. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes, this was fun. I appreciate it.
Of course. That was Chris Rose. You, of course, know him from the Best Damn Sports Show, period, and everything else in between. He's doing some amazing work with Jomboy, and he's still on NFL Network. Big Cleveland sports fan. I'm always curious about how Cleveland sports fans end up, and it seems like this one in particular ended up okay, but I would imagine over the years it's been an emotional roller coaster. Thanks to him so much for stopping by, and thank you all for tuning in to Short and to the Point here on Awful Announcing and The Comeback. Make sure you're following everything on our website and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Awful Announcing. This is where you can get not only my podcast, but the Awful Announcing podcast and everything else on there as well. This is Jessica Kleinschmidt, and thank you to Philip for always putting up with my stuff. You're the best. Even have to do a billion takes, and I appreciate you for that. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at KleinschmidtJD and head over to thecomeback.com and awfulannouncing.com.